Biden and the Prime Minister.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Hallie Jackson.
Good day. We are coming on the air with two breaking news stories, both out of Washington here. Any minute now, we're expecting President Biden to speak at the White House alongside the visiting Australian Prime Minister, with the president almost certain to address the Israel-Hamas war. It is a split screen, though, because just down Pennsylvania Avenue at the Capitol, the House, as we speak, is voting on the next Speaker of the House. And after many failed attempts to try to elect one, Republicans appear on track to finally have a candidate with enough support to win that job. So far, that appears to be candidate Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana. It appears that he may have enough votes as we speak. That wasn't the case previously in these attempts by Republicans to get a speaker, but it does look like Johnson is on track to win the magic number to get him the gavel. You are looking at it live right now. Obviously, nothing is official with this vote until it is gavelled out, but it could be a potentially very significant day at the Capitol after 3 weeks with no Speaker of the House. We are waiting, as we said, for the president to walk out with the Australian Prime Minister. With this international crisis still front and center, this war between Israel and Hamas, with the president also looking to show U.S. support for the Israelis here. The White House has sent a funding request, essentially, for additional aid to both Israel and Ukraine, among other things, over to Capitol Hill, which couldn't take any action, paralyzed without a speaker. That may change in a matter of minutes. I want to bring in our Capitol Hill correspondent, Ryan Nobles. Ryan, bring us up to speed on what's happening where you are.
Well, Hallie, you saw there just a few minutes ago on the House floor, a rounding ovation for Mike Johnson of Louisiana as he crossed over that threshold of 217 votes that will lead to him becoming the next Speaker of the House. As you rightly point out, none of this is official until officially gavelled in by the current Speaker pro tem, Patrick McHenry, but it is certainly a wildly different scene than what we've seen over the past 3 weeks, where Republicans attempted numerous times to elect a new Speaker, but were unable to find a candidate to reach that threshold of 217 votes on the floor. They appear to have done that with Johnson of Louisiana. He is, by all measure, a conservative lawmaker, but someone who cuts a much lower profile than Jim Jordan, who was one of the previous nominees for Speaker by the Republicans. He's been in office since 2016. He's currently a member of the House Judiciary Committee, but he's never held any sort of serious leadership position in Washington. He's currently the vice conference chair of the Republican Party, which makes him the fifth-ranking member of the Republican Party, but he's never been a chairman of a committee, and he's never held a leadership position all to himself. So now he is taking on the most important leadership position in the Congress. It would put him, of course, second in line to the presidency. He would control all of the legislation that comes to the floor, and he's also going to have to navigate the myriad factions that still exist within this Republican Party. Even though they have agreed to coalesce behind his candidacy, that doesn't eliminate all the different reasons behind why these other candidates for Speaker had such a difficult time rising to that position. The most pressing issue, of course, Hallie, that is going to face him the second he picks up that gavel is the looming budget deadline. Just a couple of weeks away in November, after that continuing resolution was passed by House Republicans, which ultimately led to Kevin McCarthy losing the job, he's going to have to negotiate yet another spending package that will keep the government open. So there is a long list of issues that Mike Johnson is going to be forced to deal with, and he is not going to have very much time at all to get up to speed, as he is expected now to become the next Speaker of the House. Hallie?
For people who may be unfamiliar with who Mike Johnson is, Ryan, and that may be, frankly, a lot of people in this country here, who is he, and what is it about Mike Johnson that appears to have won him the gavel that other Republicans couldn't do?
You're right, Hallie. He is by no means a household name, and that may be part of why he was able to cobble together this faction to get to 217 votes. He isn't someone that has been forced to alienate members of his party, because he's never been somebody that's been out front on some of these big issues. He's considered to be a very affable man, somebody who has good relationships with Republicans and Democrats, even though his policy positions tend to be pretty rigidly conservative. And I do think that's perhaps the most important takeaway for people that are just learning for the first time who Mike Johnson is. He is, by all measure, a right-wing conservative. He holds perhaps the most conservative positions on things like abortion, gay marriage, and others. And also, of course, he was part of the group that worked to deny the election results. But Hallie, we're back to you.
Thanks, Ryan. We'll listen in to President Biden here.
Sorry.
since you came into office, and we've met all around the world. And now it's wonderful to have you by my side here at the White House, and as we advance our alliance even more than has already been advanced. It's strong now, it's getting stronger. Before I get to the progress Australia and the United States have made today, I want to say just a very few words about the situation in the Middle East. The anger, the hurt, the sense of outrage that the Israeli people are feeling after the brutally inflicted devastation by Hamas is completely understandable. Israel has the right, and I would add responsibility, to respond to the slaughter of their people. And we will ensure Israel has what it needs to defend itself against these terrorists. That's a guarantee. We also have to remember that Hamas does not represent, let me say it again, Hamas does not represent the vast majority of the Palestinian people on the Gaza Strip or anywhere else. Hamas is hiding behind Palestinian civilians, and is despicable and, not surprisingly, cowardly as well. This also puts an added burden on Israel while they go after Hamas. But that does not lessen the need to operate in line with the laws of war. For Israel has to do everything in its power. Israel has to do everything in its power. As difficult it is to protect innocent civilians. And it's difficult. I want to thank the Israelis and the Palestinian, and President Sisi of Egypt for working with the United States to make sure that food, water, and medical supplies are getting through to innocent people in Gaza. The flow needs to increase, and we're working very hard with our partners to make that happen. We're also working around the clock together with our partners in the region to secure the release of hostages, and including American citizens left behind and held by Hamas, and the safe passage of foreign nationals out of Gaza, not just Americans, but Australians and a whole range of people who are trapped in Gaza. I also want to take a moment to look ahead toward the future that we seek. Israelis and Palestinians equally deserve to live side by side in safety, dignity, and peace. There's no going back to the status quo as it stood on October the 6th. That means ensuring Hamas can no longer terrorize Israel and use Palestinian civilians as human shields. It also means that when this crisis is over, there has to be a vision of what comes next. And in our view, it has to be a two-state solution. It means a concentrated effort from all the parties, Israelis, Palestinians, regional partners, global leaders, to put us on a path toward peace. In the past few weeks, I've spoken to leaders throughout the region, including King Abdullah of Jordan, President Sisi of Egypt, President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, and just yesterday with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, about making sure there's real hope in the region for a better future, about the need, and I mean this sincerely, about the need to work toward a greater integration for Israel, while insisting that the aspirations of the Palestinian people will be part of that future as well. I'm convinced one of the reasons Hamas attacked when they did, I have no proof of this, as my instinct tells me, is because of the progress we were making towards regional integration for Israel and regional integration overall. And we can't leave that work behind. And one more word on this. I continue to be alarmed about extremist settlers attacking Palestinians in the West Bank, that pouring gasoline on fire is what it's like. This was a deal. The deal was made, and they're attacking Palestinians in places that they're entitled to be. And it has to stop. They have to be held accountable, and it has to stop now. Mr. Prime Minister, I want to thank you for your partnership and your friendship, quite frankly, during this difficult hour. Over the past few weeks and for many months before, we've seen each other, and we've seen our alliance grow more critical than ever. And we need to continue to make this important progress. In our discussions today, we've done just that. First, we're pioneering new advancements and innovations, deepening our cooperation. It feels like
you have been listening to President Biden, of course, there at the White House, alongside the Australian Prime Minister, taking a minute at the beginning of this news conference here with reporters assembled to address the Israel-Hamas war, as he has done obviously repeatedly since that war began, back with that Hamas terror attack on October 7th. You heard the president talk about the need for the U.S. to support its ally Israel. Part of that involves what you're looking at right now, and that is the floor of the House of Representatives in Congress, which has been paralyzed for just about 3 weeks now, unable to act on the aid package that the White House sent over to provide more funding to both Israel, Ukraine, other areas of the world as well. It appears that that is no longer the case. The vote has officially been gavelled. Mike Johnson is now set to be sworn in any minute as the next Speaker of the House. I want to bring in our Capitol Hill correspondent, Ryan Nobles. Ryan, give us a sense of what it's like there in the room at the Capitol and what's set to happen in the minutes to come.
First of all, Hallie, I think the number one sense that you get from almost everyone at the Capitol is a sense of relief, a sense that this is finally over, because there were many days where not anyone could tell you how this whole saga was going to end. And it has finally ended with a new Speaker of the House who has been elected in the form of Mike Johnson of Louisiana. What we're going to see play out here now over the next few minutes is a bit of the choreographing of electing a new Speaker. He's already won the job. That's official. They've gavelled the vote in, but he'll need to be sworn in officially on the job. And so he'll exit the chamber for a period of time. He'll then be brought in with an escort committee. And then in what is somewhat of a nice tradition, it will be Hakeem Jeffries who actually introduces him to the entire body, where he will then be officially sworn in, and then he'll deliver opening remarks in his first official capacity as the Speaker of the House. And then it's expected, Hallie, that even as soon as he finishes that speech, they'll begin the process of actually legislating, something that has been paralyzed over the past 3 weeks. And we expect the first piece of legislation to be brought to the House floor is a bipartisan resolution condemning the attack on Israel by Hamas. And that is a very important thing to point out, because it really demonstrates how long that we've been in this paralysis here in Congress. That war happened several weeks ago. The start of that war happened several weeks ago. And the House of Representatives has not done anything to respond to it, even something as simple as a resolution condemning it, because of the fact that there hasn't been a Speaker of the House. So that'll be the first thing they do. And then from there, we expect a press conference where Mike Johnson will answer questions from the press for the first time as Speaker of the House. So that's what we expect the next few minutes to be like.
One of the criticisms, Ryan, that Democrats have leveled at the soon-to-be House Speaker here, Mike Johnson, is regarding his role as a key player in the House of Representatives, backing up former President Donald Trump's election fraud lies. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, Hallie, that while that is something that Democrats feel as a disqualifying position, there's every reason to be that it is a qualifying position to be a leader in the Republican Party. Of the remaining candidates here in this last round of voting, when we get back to Tom Emmer, who's the current Republican whip, he was at one point the Speaker designate, but was one of only 2 of the 8 candidates who voted to certify the election, and that drew the ire of the former President Donald Trump and many of his supporters, and was a major factor in preventing him from becoming the next Speaker of the House. Mike Johnson not only voted to object to the election results, he also played a very key role in the election challenges through the legal system. He has been described as an architect of an amicus brief that was signed by many Republican members of Congress that was filed in these lawsuits around the country. Many of these lawsuits that never even made it into the courtroom because they were thrown out by judges before they could even get to that point. Johnson's not walked back any of his positions related to the results of the 2020 election. He's called it rigged. He was all over conservative media during that period of time, saying that there was a lot of merit to the claims that were put out there by Donald Trump and his associates, despite the fact that there was very little, if any, evidence to back up those claims. Democrats have a real problem with this. They think that this is a very difficult position for him to take and then attempt to be the man in the room negotiating deals with the President of the United States, with the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who is a Democrat, and with others, when there's a whole host of things that are going to require bipartisan support in order to get over the finish line. So this is something that Republicans kind of feel that they've moved on from. It's not something Democrats have moved on from. And I'll leave you with this, Hallie. Last night, he was pressed on this. A reporter attempted to ask him about his position on election denialism. He just laughed it off and said, next question, and a chorus of boos came from his Republican colleagues behind him. So this is not something that he's been properly pressed on yet, and it'll be one of the things he's going to be forced to answer in his early days as Speaker of the House.
Perhaps as soon as that news conference he's expected to hold after he is sworn in. Ryan, I'm going to ask you to stand by, and I want to bring in Eugene Scott, senior political reporter for Axios. Given the backdrop that Ryan just laid out, Eugene, talk through the opportunities here as we are at the end of 2023, about to head into the thick of a presidential election year, a campaign year here in 2024. Any chance for some of that bipartisanship that you just heard mentioned with a Speaker Johnson and down Pennsylvania Avenue, a President Biden?
Well, it doesn't sound like it. If you listen to Democrats already, the Democratic Congressional Committee has released a statement referring to Mike Johnson as Jim Jordan in a sports coat. They believe he fundamentally takes policy positions that are so on the opposite spectrum of what Democrats want that it'll be very difficult for them to work with him. To your point earlier, he's relatively new to the Hill. He's only been in Congress since 2017, started taking some leadership positions in 2019. So Democrats don't have a lot of experience working with him. I mean, Republicans don't, which is in part why he perhaps was able to get over the finish line. But I think what we're going to see in the next few weeks are opportunities for people to get to understand and know who Mike Johnson is, and beyond the policy positions he's taken, and quite frankly, beyond a position he took that is probably of biggest concern to Democrats, as you've noted before, which is his decision not to certify the 2020 presidential election that sent Biden to the White House.
What does the landscape look like, Eugene, for policy movement moving forward here under Speaker Johnson? And by that, I mean not just that government funding deadline, the potential for yet another government shutdown, possibly as early as the middle of next month. But beyond that, legislation, bills on the floor here, bills that are being brought up that affects people's lives around the country.
That's what all eyes are going to be on. Johnson's primarily known for his socially conservative positions, his hard right positions on abortion, LGBT issues, immigration. He's not really known as a fiscal conservative. Prior to coming to Congress, he was a lawyer for Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a Christian right legal advocacy group. And much of his work, many of the organizations that have championed him since getting to Congress haven't really been known for addressing economic issues related to budget and funding government programs. And it'll be really interesting to see where he really stands on these issues, considering that's not been his primary focus since coming to Capitol Hill.
Ryan, let me go back to you on this here. Talk about now what the landscape looks like over the coming 6 months or so, and the challenges that Speaker Johnson, soon to be Speaker Johnson, is going to have to face beyond what you've walked through here.
So the biggest issue that he's going to be confronted with here in the first few weeks on the job is how to navigate the budget and how he's going to try and get through this very difficult position of the conservative hardliners not wanting to agree to the principles that were laid out in the debt ceiling agreement that Kevin McCarthy negotiated back in June versus what some of these conservative hardliners have wanted in terms of steep budget cuts. And that's going to have to start with some sort of short-term spending bill that allows them some time to negotiate this so that they can pass through the 12 different appropriations packages. You know, part of the reason that we're in this position is because of Kevin McCarthy negotiating that deal and being forced to get Democrat support in order to get over the finish line. But the budget shutdown is really just a kind of an example of all the other deals that are going to force to be cut if anything is going to get done. And so you look at the budget showdown as one thing, but then we have a $105 billion supplemental package that the president has asked in terms of these foreign policy issues that includes funding for Ukraine, which is very controversial within the Republican caucus, includes funding for Israel, which many Republicans support but don't want it tied to Ukraine. Also border security proposals that don't necessarily address the policies themselves. That's something Republicans aren't happy with. And there's also funding for Taiwan and other things. You know, there's going to have to be some give and take from both sides if this funding is going to get over the finish line. And the posture of the Republicans that essentially toppled Kevin McCarthy was that there's no room for negotiation. We either get everything or we get nothing. And so if Mike Johnson is going to have to decide pretty early on what type of speaker he's going to be, is he going to be the speaker that gets into the room and negotiates these issues to get to a point where there are conservative wins within these packages? They may not get everything, but they're going to get something. Or is he going to be a hardline speaker that reflects the hard line of his caucus and just say it's either all of this or nothing, and we could lead to even more of a stalemate? And I think that's important for our viewers to understand, Hallie, is that this is just the first step on a huge mountain that Mike Johnson is going to be forced to climb, because the difficulties that lay in front of him in trying to navigate all these different factions is going to be very difficult.
That's an important point, Ryan. I want to bring in our senior White House correspondent,
Mr. Speaker,
who is joining us now. And Gabe, as we're listening in now to the next steps in the process of bringing in the soon-to-be House Speaker, introducing Mike Johnson. You see him walking down the center aisle there. He will shake hands. He will greet people in what is obviously a significant moment for him. You can see behind him there Steve Scalise, the congressman who tried to become Speaker early on in this process just a couple weeks ago, did not have the votes. And behind him, of course, the top Democrat in the House, Hakeem Jeffries. Gabe, as we watch this moment here, Mike Johnson is a relative fresh face, if you will, compared to, for example, President Biden's many decades of service at the Capitol as a senator here. Do we have any sense of any kind of relationship that the two already have, how they might build a relationship and or work together on some of the priorities that the Biden administration has?
Hi there, Hallie. Well, as we understand it, the two aren't particularly close and don't have much of a relationship, and we're still waiting an initial reaction from the White House, given that this news is just breaking. But, Hallie, this all comes, as you know, after weeks of the White House trying to paint the disarray on Capitol Hill and the fact that Congress has been essentially paralyzed with no House Speaker. The White House has been trying to paint this as Republican chaos holding up aid to Ukraine and to Israel. You heard Ryan mention there that $105 billion supplemental request that, requires not just aid for, or that is asking Congress not just for aid for Israel and the Hamas war, but also the war in Ukraine and also some domestic priorities as well, dealing with national security, funding at the border. The White House has repeatedly said over the last couple of days that all that is put on hold with no House Speaker. And we understand there, had been some frustration at the White House. The president is speaking right now at a news conference with the Australian Prime Minister ahead of a state dinner later tonight. And earlier today, we were told by a senior White House official that there had been an invitation extended to some Republican leadership, Patrick Mahenry as well as Steve Scalise, but both of those had declined that invitation to the state dinner. So it is unclear at this point who would have been the Speaker of the House and who would have attended that state dinner in that place. But again, we are awaiting an initial White House statement following the election of this House Speaker, and we could hear from the president shortly as he's expected to take questions in this news conference with the Australian Prime Minister, Hallie.
Gabe, thank you. Let me go back now to the Hill with our Ryan Nobles. And Ryan, I feel compelled to point out that this is not how it typically goes. This is not how this process might normally work at the beginning of a new session, a new term of Congress here. Normally, the Speaker vote is fairly pro forma. We know what's going to happen. It's a process that has a predetermined outcome. That has been far from the case in what we've seen over the course of the last 3 weeks here.
Yeah, you're right. It's usually just ceremonial. This has been anything but ceremonial. Everything about it has been substantial. And it's also important to point out, Hallie, there's no guarantees here, right? The motion to vacate, which is the process that led to the removal of Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, is still in place. So if Mike Johnson does something that draws the ire of a group of 5 different members of his party, he could easily be thrown out of office yet again. So he's going to have at least some sort of a honeymoon, but we don't know how long that honeymoon will last.
Do we know his relationship, if he has one, with Hakeem Jeffries, the, of course, Democratic leader who we're watching right now?
As far as we know, he doesn't really have that much of a relationship with him. There wouldn't have been much of a reason for Johnson and Jeffries to interact. So this is going to be one of those relationships he's going to be forced to cultivate pretty early on.
Ryan Nobles, thank you so much. Juggling many things there on Capitol Hill, as we are here in Washington, too, with President Biden, of course, at the White House, and a new Speaker of the House now set to be sworn in. Much more to come here on NBC News, on our streaming channel, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com, and, of course, on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt a little bit later. I'm Hallie Jackson on behalf of all of us here. Thanks for watching. See you soon.